Today, we're doing something a little bit different, but absolutely fascinating. We're going to look at a unifying theme hidden inside two completely different worlds, and that theme is strategically navigating highly competitive, rule-bound systems. You see, whether you're trying to get a study permit approved by a national government, or you're just trying to get your video recommended by a digital algorithm, you are essentially dealing with a gatekeeper. And both of these gatekeepers, well, they have incredibly strict rules, very specific priorities, and intense competition. So we're going to break down the exact strategies you need to find your way through these gateways, using two really relevant real-world examples. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our agenda for today. First, the 2026 visa squeeze. Second, exemptions and provincial limits. Third, winning the YouTube click. And finally, titles and analytics. Two distinct topics, but one shared strategic mindset. All right, section 1, the 2026 visa squeeze. Let's start with our very first major gatekeeper, the Canadian government. 48,000. For 2026, Canada is planning to issue only 48,000 study permits. And yeah, that actually includes both new students and people just extending their existing permits. To put that into perspective for you, just 2 years ago, Canada had over 1 million study permit holders. Seriously, over 1 million. So this staggering drop is highly intentional. The country is practically slamming the brakes, executing a massive crackdown to get its temporary resident population below 5% by the end of 2027. And since international students make up a huge chunk of that group, the government is using these permit caps as the fastest way to slow down that growth. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how that remaining highly contested pie gets sliced up geographically. Ontario is set to get the biggest piece, with a target of just over 70,000 approvals. Then you've got Quebec with almost 39,500, British Columbia hovering around 25,000, and Alberta expecting roughly 21,500. The smaller provinces, they're getting maybe a few hundred each. So what does this mean for you? Well, if you're applying to a massive, popular province like Ontario or BC, the gatekeeper's door is incredibly narrow right now. Let's move on to Section 2. Exemptions and provincial limits. So, knowing the door is closing, how do you actually get through? Well, we've got to look at the specific rules. For 2026, one of the biggest hurdles is all about PALs and TALs. Those stand for Provincial and Territorial Attestation Letters. If you're a standard undergrad or college-level applicant, you're almost certainly going to need this approval letter before you can even apply for a study permit. It's literally a gatekeeper right in front of the actual gatekeeper. Out of everything available, only about 180,000 spots are reserved for students who need these letters. But, and this is absolutely crucial, the gatekeeper has carved out some exemptions. Groups that officially do not need a PAL or TAL include master's and PhD students at public institutions, primary and secondary school students, and people extending their permit at the exact same institution and level. So, what's the big takeaway here? Canada is clearly prioritizing researchers, innovators, and highly skilled talent. Graduate programs are now a massive strategic advantage because they let you bypass the absolute fiercest competition entirely. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the hidden layer of competition it reveals. You see, these targets reflect expected approvals, not the total number of applications they actually accept for processing. Because so many applications get rejected, Canada creates way more application spaces than actual permits. Just look at Ontario, over 104,000 application spaces, but only 70,000 expected approvals. Quebec has over 93,000 spaces for just 39,500 approvals. So even if you manage to grab a spot in line, you're still facing intensely high refusal rates. You're basically playing a numbers game against a very, very strict system. All right, Section 3, winning the YouTube click. We're pivoting sharply right now to our second gatekeeper. We're taking the exact same strategic mindset we just used for visas and applying it to the digital world. I want you to ask yourself this. How can your audience tell what your video is about? Before they hear you speak, before they see your amazing editing, they have to let you through their personal gateway. And almost always, that first impression is just your thumbnail and your title. It dictates whether they scroll right past you or stop to click. 90%. That is a massive number, and the data backs it up perfectly. 90% of the best performing videos on YouTube use custom thumbnails. Kind of like that 48,000 visa cap we talked about, this 90% figure sets the baseline stakes we're dealing with. If you aren't customizing your visuals, you are virtually guaranteed to be locked out of top-tier discoverability. You simply have to play by the gatekeeper's visual rules. To do that, you need to know exactly who you're targeting. The contrast here is super important. If you want to pull in casual viewers, people who've never seen you before, your visuals really need to focus on universally relatable actions and emotions. Think of a big, expressive, shocked face. But if you're making something targeted mostly at your existing subscribers, you want to lean into familiar features they already recognize. Maybe it's a recurring joke or your best friend or a familiar setting. Different targets require entirely different visual strategies. And beyond just the psychology, there are some structural rules for these digital gatekeepers too. You'll want to use the rule of thirds to give your thumbnail a really interesting off-center composition. Definitely use dynamic colors to catch the eye, but avoid making it so complex that it's just a cluttered mess. If you're adding text, use a bold, easy-to-read font. Remember, people are looking at this on tiny phone screens. Also, upload the largest image file possible so it looks crisp on everything from a smartphone up to a giant smart TV. Oh, and one pro tip, audience tastes change over time, so going back and updating older thumbnails is an awesome way to bring fresh eyes to your past work. Let's move to section 4 and see how this builds into titles and analytics. So a great thumbnail catches the eye, for sure, but the title gives it context. And just like your thumbnail, your title strategy forces a choice. Are you going for a searchable title or an intriguing title? Searchable titles clearly tell the viewer exactly what to expect. They're perfect if you want to reach people actively typing a specific question into the search bar. Intriguing titles, on the other hand, are all about sparking curiosity. They work wonderfully for viewers who are just scrolling their home feed, not looking for anything specific, but totally open to being entertained. Once you've picked your lane, you've got to follow the literal rules of title writing. Step 1, be accurate. If you bait and switch your viewers, they're going to click away immediately, and the algorithm will absolutely punish you for it. Step 2, be succinct. People often only see the first half of a title on their phones, so put your most critical, heavy-hitting words right at the beginning. Save the episode numbers for the very end. And step 3, limit the all caps and emojis. Think of them like salt. Actually, maybe think of them like hot sauce. A little bit adds a kick of emotion, but too much just ruins the whole thing. So, the crucial point is knowing how to measure if any of this actually worked. When you dive into your analytics, the king of all metrics is your click-through rate, or CTR, especially in those first 24 hours. But where you look makes all the difference. If you built a strategy for a general audience, go look at your CTR on the home and suggested feeds. If you targeted your hardcore subscribers, check your CTR in the subscriptions feed. That data is basically the gatekeeper telling you exactly how you're doing. Look, whether we're talking about acceptance rates for a Canadian study permit or the click-through rate on a YouTube video, the underlying lesson is exactly the same. You just can't rely on luck. You have to understand the rules, identify what the gatekeeper actually cares about, and structure your approach to fit their parameters. So I want to leave you with this final thought. Look at the system standing between you and your goals right now. How will you adapt your strategy to navigate these highly competitive gateways? Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. I really look forward to exploring more fascinating systems with you next time. Keep learning and keep strategizing.